Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One-to-One. Educators spend a lot of time trying to pinpoint the basic building blocks of knowledge that children need in order to have rewarding lives. We know that the arts are essential, but what constitutes art and how can it be incorporated into each child's everyday life? Is there music for all of us? One organization that's bringing the arts to New York City school children is the Center for Arts Education. The nonprofit was established 20 years ago, and its new executive director, Lisa Robb, is here to tell us what her organization is doing to make art as vital a part of children's education as math and history. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
Periodically, one hears about New York City schools that don't have a single art teacher, that don't have a music program, that sometimes they don't even have a library, about schools where teachers have to purchase art supplies, at least for little kids, with their own money. I assume this is because schools have to prioritize what they're going to spend their budgets on, and say if they have a real need for teachers' aides or for people to do remedial work, or if they have help a lot of non-English speaking kids, need tutors for the state exams, then the principal will decide that it's the art programs that have to go. Is that what happens?
I think setting these educational priorities in a large urban district like New York City is a tremendous challenge. We have seen, though, sadly, probably since the late 70s, even in the 80s, the chipping away of certain parts of the complete education that sort of became viewed as non-essential or discretionary, even if there were requirements around them. And we've seen that in a variety of places, and arts is one of them. It's easy for me to single out arts. It's a passion for me, but I do believe clearly that the skills that studying the arts bring to the child's learning experience and the teacher's sort of bag of tricks is undeniable. The good news is, with the 21st century knocking at our doors, and here we are, the kind of skills that make themselves available through arts learning make it something I think that will be easier and easier to prioritize to leaders and policymakers.
What are we talking about when we talk about public school art programs?
There are a variety. We have to remember, let's go back a bit to the New York City and New York State and what's required. New York State has 4 curriculum areas that are required in arts learning, and they are visual arts, theater, dance, and
Music?
Music, thank you. And those 4 areas are taught in a variety of ways, and there are different requirements at different parts of a child's education in the elementary, middle, and high school. And the Regents diploma certainly requires the study of art to receive a Regents diploma. Now, we'll start at the beginning and note that music and visual arts are probably the strongest art forms throughout a child's 12-year learning experience, and we know there are dedicated arts teachers in music rooms. There are certain extracurricular activities that can occur across a wide variety of arts activities.
Choir, band.
Exactly. Yearly shows, classroom shows, exhibitions, etc. Some of which are based in the arts learning from an arts teacher, and some of which are coming out of a classroom or a school site as a way to gather. We also have the real movement over the last probably 20 years to have working artists coming into the classroom situation and assisting a classroom teacher with learning, which uses the art skill set to advance other types of learning opportunities in math, in science, in English.
So what is it that schools are not most likely not to have? Would it be painting and sculpture, that kind of thing?
It really varies, because I think that I would hate to focus on only the problems that are out there, because there are a significant number of classrooms in New York City, in New York State, in the United States, which don't have the right amount of arts taking place in terms of what would be ideal and in some cases required. Again, this is physical education. We're dealing with a lot of the same issues. I think that if we get the right if we get the right framework around thinking about how arts can advance the skills and then we embed them into other curriculum areas, and then don't lose sight of the fact that every school needs to have a dedicated arts space and a dedicated arts teacher, that taking that comprehensive approach is probably how we can get the arts back where they need to be as a really prominent part of a curriculum.
And do most schools have that now, or does it just vary?
It really varies, and that's why I didn't. If we talk about what is the state requirement and the city requirement, there is a lot of variability. There are probably several hundred schools that still don't have a dedicated arts teacher on site. There are some schools that have a dedicated arts teacher, but perhaps the ratio of students to the teacher is very high and they could use another arts teacher. And I will say again that to your first comment, what a tremendous job the elected officials, the school leaders, and the teachers do in trying to figure out how to allocate these resources in terms of this broad set of priorities. We do think that arts advances so many other priorities that it can be a really interesting litmus test about how well the overall well-rounded education of a child can be. We see schools where arts learning is taking place have higher graduation rates at the secondary level. We see less absenteeism at schools where there are before or after school art activities. Most after-school programs, which we know bring tremendous benefits to children learning, always include arts, culture, heritage as part of their offerings.
And I would think that pretty much every school, most public schools would have a choir, some kind of choral group, probably a band, maybe a rhythm band for the little kids. Would they have those basics? If they
No, I would
No?
say not. I would say there are a lot. There are about 1,800 New York City schools serving 1.1 million children. And although the needle has moved tremendously on the engagement in dedicated spaces by arts teachers, there are 300 new arts teachers in the last year and a half that have come into New York City school systems due to a new flood of funding that came in a very historic agreement in 2014. But again, if we step back a bit and think about, I grew up down south, and it was before the women's movement, and the women who were teaching, most of them were musicians. Seriously, in like half of my elementary school classrooms, there were pianos. We were reciting poetry. There were annual shows. There were these kind of extracurriculars that you might think about, and it wasn't a particularly wealthy district I was in. Things have really changed tremendously in terms of the resources that are available for what we consider a complete or well-rounded education.
So where did the money for all these new art teachers come from in New York?
Well, it was a great public-private partnership due to the mayoral elections and city council elections and the historic amount of new elected officials that were going to come in the end of 13 for 14. The new comptroller got very interested in some of the statistics around arts education because the Department of Ed, which is very supportive, actually, of arts education, they are very supportive, but they've got statistics going back to 2006. So the comptroller actually realized, I can really look and map and look at some of the assets, how they're distributed, see if there are any patterns or trends that are laudable or troubling. And he found some troubling patterns, the comptroller's office did, and working with the city council, the Department of Education, the mayor's office, and the comptroller together, a happy quartet, figured out a way to drive $93 million more over 4 years to address. There were inequities. There were clusters of schools in poor neighborhoods where household income was very low, clusters of schools without a full-time dedicated personnel, and they made immediate efforts to address this.
And would that be because the money had to be spent, there were just other priorities? Would it be because they didn't have the kind of PTAs that could raise $1 million a year for arts programs, or what?
I think that where you see funding coming into schools that's in general for academic priorities, there's a sense with arts that it is not necessarily one of the basics. That myth needs to be dispelled immediately. It is a basic building block of a strong and complete education. And in the 21st century, the skills that we learn about and that kind of expression become more and more important in the kind of workforce marketplace that we talk about. It is complicated in, I don't quite understand why there's not more willingness when the research is very strong, and that when you bring more arts into the learning day, you get better social engagement, academic skill engagement. You really see the needle move in a variety of different kind of outcomes that a school environment should be concerned with. It is sort of mystifying, but there are a lot of competing interests. And I do think that in general, the way arts functions in the United States, it doesn't have as strong a voice in the public realm. From a government perspective, government funding of the arts is not particularly large or strong in the United States. It's a private sector. We see where arts does take place in these 1,800 public schools. A tremendous amount of that resource is coming from the outside, actually from philanthropy, not only of the school communities with PTAs, but actually with funders. We are so appreciative to the philanthropic community in New York.
But I guess, if you have school districts or even whole systems where you only have 30% of the students, you have schools where 5% of the students are reading at grade level.
Correct.
So probably art is not going to be a big priority there.
Well, if we don't think of that, if we don't think of multimodal skill sets, or what Howard Gardner and his multiple intelligences theory, and the fact that there are so many ways to get a child to the desired outcome that may involve, I had the child that learned the multiplication tables through music. That was the way, the music multiplication, 2 times 2 is 4. So I do think that we need to help teacher ed. We have to go back. It's a big onion to peel, but teacher education is, of course, where we would love to see more art skill-based learning for those that are studying to be teachers.
Having visited a number of private schools around the city and having seen the kind of student artwork that they have on display, I gathered that private schools, in contrast, because they have a lot more money to work with, tend to have rather rich art programs, and that.
Well, I think that it's interesting. There are parochial schools, right, and there are independent church schools, and then there are independent schools, a whole realm. I think in general, depending on the private school you're talking about, most people consider music and visual arts, at least, to be something which on a weekly basis they assume their child is participating in, whether it's vocal, orchestral music, music theory, and indeed visual arts. So I think for some reason, and I don't know if that's because the stresses and strains on an urban school district dealing with many, many families that are not in the safety net to begin with. So the learning challenges that many of the students are bringing with them, associated challenges that are going on in their household, may be something different about how they can make some of the decisions about allocating their resources. But what we see with the arts is it meets learners where they are. You could be a special ed student, you could be a very high-performing student, you could be a student that's seen with behavioral problems, a student that stumbles with maybe math learning, and be able to thrive and flourish in the arts and see some of those skills actually bear witness to you doing better in some of those academic areas. So I think that we can't lose sight of schools needing dedicated spaces for arts learning to go on, right? And then we also need more and more of our classroom teaching to bring in arts-based practices to help in science, in math, in English. It's easier certainly in English, but in social studies, there's an easier connection. But even in math and science, there we see in real-world practice, creativity-based learning and art skill-based learning can really help advance those goals.
We're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Lisa Robb, Executive Director of the Center for Arts Education, after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Cheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Lisa Robb, Executive Director of the Center for Arts Education. The center was started in 1996 to address, I guess, the gaps in art programs in the public schools. What impact has the center made? Where are we now as compared to where we were back then?
We're better, and we do thank all the taxpayers out there who are watching, as well as the elected officials, because there are more resources being put in by the Department of Education into arts learning, capital resources, supplies, teachers, and this issue about dedicated space. The numbers are better than they've been in several decades. There was sort of a whittling away and then large cuts, and we've had a steady progress up. I think the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York City also is very supportive of arts learning, not only in the classroom, but there are probably 650, I think, cultural partners that work with schools who are 501c3 nonprofit arts groups, big and small. So things are definitely on the upswing. The statistics are better than they've been. Classroom teachers are more and more receptive to the idea of, kind of wraparound learning, wraparound skills, thinking about well-rounded educations and how 21st century learning is really different, and it's here to stay. So I think the news is good. I think the setting has really improved over the last 15 years, and certainly over the last 5 years tremendously.
An early focus for the center was providing grants to schools to partner with various cultural organizations in the city. Is that still the main thrust of your work?
Well, what we've done, we started as a re-granting organization through the great windfall of philanthropy when Walter Annenberg sold the TV Guide Company. And a lot of that money went to arts education and after school. After the 10-year period in which we were re-granting ended, the needs were still so large in New York, not only to provide activities for school children in partnerships with schools, which we still do now, about 10,000 students we're serving, in about 150 schools, but there was really the need to advocate, to have some kind of a voice for arts education. And there was also the need to develop and roll out professional learning for school leaders and classroom teachers, teaching artists and arts teachers, to give more of the pedagogical heft that's there with arts education, but had ebbed away as some of the resources had ebbed away. So right now the Arts Center for Arts Education deals with professional learning for all of those groups, school leaders, principals, superintendents. We work with the United Federation of Teachers. We work with the Principals Union, providing different professional learning opportunities, classroom teachers, teaching artists. Then we're also advocating, we're testifying, we're here today, making sure that the bigger voice than just Center for Arts Education is out there, making sure school parents understand that their kids are entitled to arts education, and they need to, lend their voice to making sure those resources get there.
So what are you educating these teachers, principals, whatever in? Are you teaching teachers how to teach various arts, or what are you teaching them? How are you educating them?
There's a lot of interesting work in professional learning around arts education now that is much more evolved from, say, 40 and 50 years ago. So we're seeing the kind of different sort of learning processes that teachers are using in classrooms now, learning through different modes.
To teach history or math or English
to teach
or whatever.
anything, technology. We're seeing the use of the research tools that are available now certainly lend themselves very well to arts learning. And so a lot of the sort of new resources that teachers have in their rooms are lending themselves to arts learning. As well, we're helping classroom teachers understand how very concrete art skills, perspective, musical notation, narrative, scripting can add to their own efforts in lesson planning and lesson development on very, geometry, geologic time, a variety of ways.
Now, you mentioned 10,000 students you're serving in 150 schools.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, one of the ways that we keep up on what is working and what's happening is we consider ourselves sort of a small lab. We do probably 5 or 6 different kinds of programs in about 150 schools, some of which are aesthetic education, which might be bringing in performing groups over a period of time with learning that the classroom teachers are then bringing back in about an art form, a performing art form that, say, an entire school is seeing. We're doing these classroom-based residencies with teachers, school-based teachers and teaching artists. We're doing work. We have a drum corps and some choruses that we run and operate in schools. So we're trying to mirror how we see the arts being delivered. We're in some after-school, some CASA programs, working with the City Council. So trying to mirror what actually goes out there in that sort of laboratory of learning in arts education, we try to mirror that. So we have about 12 different programs in about 5 different sort of pedagogical approaches, and that's where we're rolling these
So would you have
activities
some
out.
professional painters coming in teaching
Yes.
with painting class? Would you have some dancers coming in teaching
Absolutely.
dance classes?
Theater arts, storytelling. We don't do that much in literary arts and folk arts yet. Dance, visual arts, tremendous amount of visual arts across a variety of different art forms also. And that's another thing that's going on now is we see the interdisciplinary approach coming up when we work with theater and music. We see elements and dance of those fusing together, and that can be very exciting for kids, for allow a variety of different kind of talents to participate. And it also, these programs allow public gatherings oftentimes to share within your own grade level, within your own classroom, and then within larger school-based performances. And that's another opportunity that the arts bring.
So you'd have an art exhibit at the school, or you'd
Correct.
have some kind of
Oh, a music
performance.
festival, it could be chorus, could be orchestral music, dance, ballroom dance, it could be folkloric dance, it could be curated hip hop. There's rhythm and blues. We're developing a new curriculum around rhythm and blues. We have a curriculum with Historic Hudson on runaway slave advertisements, primary source material, and we work with a collage artist to work with the colonial slavery curriculum that is for the 4th and 5th grades. No, excuse me, middle school grades. So there are so many different places where the arts are already embedded in exactly what is occurring, and just it's like it's value added.
When I was in school in Birmingham, Alabama, if you sang in the choir, there was an annual citywide music festival where all of the choirs from all of the schools, well, I was in Alabama, so these were all black schools, choirs from all the black schools got
Right.
together
Segregated.
And performed. Is there anything like that in New York?
You know, it's not happening as much in the art space as we would like. There is a very comprehensive Poetry Out Loud program that is a national program that a lot of New York City public schools participate in. There are ballroom dancing for the through 5th grade. We see
And competitions.
We see more work in forensic speech, rhetorical speech with debate. We see more with science and maker fairs. We don't see as much with the arts, music, dance as we would like, but we know that that's something that the public and parents have a comfort level with. It would not be something that was a strange expectation for them. So we do hope that that's what's informing principals and the Department of Education as they're making these difficult decisions about what to prioritize as they're allocating resources.
Are you involved at all in, say, purchasing tickets for the kids at a particular school to go to a play or to a concert? Do you do that, or do other city agencies or organizations do that?
Yes, there is a wonderful service organization, the Art Educators Roundtable, which is, my goodness, I don't know their statistics, but dozens and dozens and dozens of not-for-profit organizations involved with all of the work that's going on with art education. So museums and performing arts centers whose work is in bringing children into their space. We do some of that as appropriate in certain types of programs. But, I mean, there are large organizations, that have 10,000, 15,000, 100,000 school children that they're able to serve every year. And many cultural partners work to bring the youth into their site for that kind of art and aesthetic education experience, which is so important, as New York is one of the global, well, if not the global arts capital. We have a lot of amenities in communities, libraries, parks, and cultural resources that are part of that whole sort of lifelong learning, arts, culture, learning world. And we wish we were doing more of that in the elementary, middle, and high school.
The artists who do residencies in these different schools, whether it's a dancer, whether it's a painter, whomever,
Yes.
now are they paid or do they tend to volunteer their services?
Oh, yes, no, we want to pay the artists, always. We want to always pay the artists. In our organization, the artists are paid. We have about 150 teaching artists on our roster, and then I think about 60 or 70 that actually on a given year are working in the different programs. They are paid a variety of rates. Some are on, government contracts. Some of the rates are fixed by, say, a PTA or the school funding, and some of them are fixed by us.
And the funding for your organization comes from where?
Oh, what generous souls out there aren't helping us? We're getting funding from government. We have fee-for-service contracts from Department of Education. We have funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, from the Federal Department of Education, from the New York City Department of Education, from the state. Many, many funders, many foundation. We're in the B. Altman building, Altman Foundation. Is a funder. Lots of wonderful, the Illumination Fund, New York Community Trust. Many individuals, our very generous board. So like so many other nonprofits, we're trying to have a very diverse sources of revenue, and we try to earn some of our funding as well as have some of it donated.
So you see arts on their way up in the public schools?
Oh, absolutely. And we still are, unfortunately, in a position where there sort of still is only one way to go. We really do. We do have a journey that we're still on, but we see so much receptivity with the City Council, with the elected officials, with Department of Education, Cultural Affairs, parents. The most important advocates that we can develop are our parents. There's no problem in getting people excited, but we are, like many of the other academic content areas, fighting, persuading, advocating for resources that are adequate to address the needs and requirements.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank Lisa Robb, Executive Director of the Center for Arts Education, for joining me. If you'd like more information or want to get involved, just go to the centerforartsed.org. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.